The world we know is loud, bright, and driven by the relentless ticking of the clock. But to understand the seed of this story, we must let the modern world dissolve. We must drift back through the mists of deep time, receding past the age of steel and steam, past the rise of empires, until we stand upon the fertile mud of the Neolithic era. Here, under the burning, indifferent sun of Mesopotamia, the air hangs heavy with the scent of wet earth and drying reeds. This is the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve through the desert landscape like life-giving veins, feeding the first great cities of man. And it is here, roughly 5,000 years ago, amidst the green geometry of early irrigation ditches, that humanity first made a pact with a delicate, trembling flower. Image a papaver somniferum illustration. Picture the landscape of ancient Sumer. The heat shimmers off the clay brick walls of Uruk and Ur. The sky is a blinding, pale azure. In the fields, swaying gently in the hot wind, stands a crop that is distinct from the wheat and the barley. It is vibrant, crowned with petals of white, violet, or deep crimson, a splash of color against the ochre dust. This is papaver somniferum asterisk, the sleep-bringing poppy. To the ancient Sumerians, those inventors of writing and the wheel, this was not merely a botanical curiosity. They gave it a name that echoes through the clay tablets of history with a haunting simplicity. *Jill*, the joy plant. It is difficult for us, looking back through the lens of modern addiction and war, to understand the innocence of this first encounter. Imagine a Sumerian priest or a wary farmer standing before the plant as the petals fall away, revealing the smooth, blue-green seed capsule. It looks like a crown, or perhaps a small, spherical world. The harvest of this plant was a ritual of precision and patience, a practice that has remained virtually unchanged for millennia. The cultivator approaches the capsule while it is still unripe, wielding a small, sharp blade, perhaps made of flint or obsidian. With a steady hand, he scores the skin of the bulb not too deep to kill it, but deep enough to open a vein. Almost immediately, the plant responds. From the wound, a milky white substance bleeds out. It is a latex, viscous and bitter, gleaming like a pearl in the sunlight. As the hours pass and the sun tracks its arc across the Mesopotamian sky, this white milk oxidizes. It darkens, turning into a sticky, resinous gum, brown as the earth itself. This resin is raw opium. To the ancients, witnessing this transformation, it must have seemed like magic, a liquid spirit drawn from the soil, offering a power that no other food or herb possessed. It was the physical manifestation of peace, a divine secret locked within a capsule, waiting to be released by the hand of man. In a world where pain was a constant companion, where dysentery, fevers, broken bones, and the ache of hard labor defined the human experience, the *Jill* was a miracle. It was the ultimate mercy. One can imagine the clay cup being passed to a screaming child teething in the night, or to a dying elder whose final days were racked with agony. A small piece of the bitter gum, dissolved in wine or rolled into a pill, brought a silence so profound it felt like a rehearsal for death itself. It did not just numb the body, it uncoupled the spirit from the suffering of the flesh. The Sumerians believed that sickness was often the work of demons or the displeasure of gods. And here was a substance that could banish those demons, smoothing the furrowed brow and slowing the racing heart into a rhythm of heavy, dreamless slumber. This relationship was symbiotic and, in those early days, devoid of the moral shadows that would later stretch across centuries. There were no drug wars here, no cartels, no alleyways of destitution, only the communion between the suffering human and the sleeping earth. The poppy was cultivated with the same reverence as the grain that made their bread. It was a gift from the pantheon, a way to endure the harshness of existence. When the Sumerian physicians pressed their cuneiform styluses into wet clay to record their pharmacopoeia, they listed opium not as a scourge, but as a pillar of healing. It was the hand of the ghost that could pull a man back from the brink of madness caused by pain. Yet, even in this cradle of innocence, the duality of the substance was present, whispering in the background. The Sumerians understood that the *Holgil* offered joy, but it was a specific kind of joy, the joy of forgetting, the joy of oblivion. It was a heaviness that could trap the soul as easily as it liberated it. As the knowledge of the poppy spread from the Sumerians to the Assyrians, and later to the Babylonians and Egyptians, the milk of paradise began its long migration through the human bloodstream. The clay tablets hardened in the sun, preserving the recipe for silence, ensuring that this botanical secret would not be lost to the shifting sands. As we visualize those ancient fields at dusk, the sun dipping below the horizon and painting the rivers in shades of blood and gold, we see the silhouette of the harvester scraping the brown gum from the bulb. He gathers the resin, his fingers stained with the essence of sleep. He does not know that he is holding a substance that will one day topple empires, fund wars, and enslave millions. To him, it is simply the *Holgil*, the fruit of the earth that brings rest to the weary. The story of opium begins here, in the mud and the heat, with a simple cut and a weeping flower. A quiet moment of discovery that would echo like thunder through the rest of human history. The desert wind is a traveler that knows no borders, carrying with it the dust of empires and the seeds of fate. As we leave the fertile crescent behind, the hot breeze carries us westward, across the unforgiving expanse of the Sinai, until the world transforms once again. The ochre dust gives way to the black, life-giving silt of the Nile Valley. We have arrived in the Golden Empire of Egypt, a civilization obsessed with the journey of the soul and the preservation of the body. Here, amidst the colossal statues and the sun-bleached limestone of the pyramids, the poppy found a second home, rooting itself deep in the spiritual and medical bedrock of the pharaohs. In this land of monumental geometry, the plant was known as the *spem* or *sheepen* plant. The Egyptians, with their penchant for weaving the divine into the physical, did not see the resin merely as a drug. They saw it as a theological substance. The mythology of the time whispered that these flowers grew from the tears of Ra, the sun god. Picture the deity, the falcon-headed lord of the sky, weeping over the suffering of humanity, or perhaps the vast loneliness of the cosmos. As his divine tears struck the earth, they did not vanish. They sprouted into the poppy, crystallizing into the bitter latex that held the power of the sun's warmth and the heavy stillness of the night. It was a poetic reconciliation, the god of the sun providing the tool for darkness and sleep. Enter the cool, sandstone corridors of Thebes, roughly 3.5 millennia ago. The air is thick with incense and the smell of roasting meats from the temple offerings. Here, the priesthood and the physicians, often one and the same, labored over their pharmacopoeia. We can visualize an Egyptian doctor, his head shaved clean, bowing over a mortar of alabaster. He grinds the poppy seeds and the dried gum, mixing them with fly-specked debris, beer, or sweet wine. He is following the instructions of the Eber's Papyrus, a scroll fragile with age, which serves as one of our oldest windows into the medical mind of the ancient world. The papyrus details remedies that chill us with their practicality. One prescription is specifically designed to prevent the excessive crying of children. It suggests mixture of poppy pods and fly dirt, strained into a pulp and forced down the throat of the infant. It was a crude, effective silence in a world without aspirin or antibiotics, where the heat bred pestilence and the nights were filled with the cries of the sick. The tears of Ra were the only mercy available. It silenced the screaming child. Yes, but one wonders how often the dose was too high, pushing the small soul from the temporary sleep of hypnos into the permanent embrace of the afterlife. In the golden shadow of the Sphinx, the line between healing and extinguishing was terrifyingly thin. But the history of the poppy is a history of movement. We must cast our gaze northward now, crossing the wine-dark sea of the Mediterranean. The landscape changes from the flat, river-fed grandeur of Egypt to the jagged, rocky spines of the Grecian archipelago. Here, the light is starker, the air salty and brisk. We are in the cradle of Western philosophy, where the mind was celebrated above all else. Yet, it was here, on these rocky shores, that the understanding of the poppy matured from a theological gift into a philosophical paradox. The ancient Greeks, with their unflinching willingness to categorize the human condition, understood the duality of the flower better than any civilization before them. They looked at the poppy and saw a mirror of their own cosmology. In Greek mythology, sleep asterisk hypnos asterisk and death asterisk thanatos asterisk were twin brothers, born of the primordial night. They were inseparable, two faces of the same coin. The Greeks noticed how the poppy capsule, when heavy with seed, droops its head on the stem, mimicking the posture of a dying man or a sleeper nodding off. Because of this, they crowned their statues of Hypnos and Thanatos with wreaths of poppies. Walk through a mental reconstruction of a temple to Asclepios, the god of healing. The sick would come here to practice incubation, sleeping in holy sanctuaries in hopes of a cure. The air would be heavy with the smoke of opium, used to induce the sacred dreams where the gods might speak. It was here that the flower ceased to be just a plant and became a pharmakon, a Greek word that treacherously means both remedy and poison. The distinction lay only in the dosage. The Greeks recognized that the very substance that could unbind the soul from the body's pain could also sever the cord of life entirely. This intellectual fascination culminated in the figure of Galen, the physician to the gladiators and eventually the Roman emperors. Galen, a man of immense intellect and ego, spoke of opium with a reverence that bordered on obsession. He championed the theriac asterisk, a complex, molasses-like brew containing dozens of ingredients, with opium as the heavy, beating heart of the mixture. It was the ultimate panacea, the cure-all that wealthy citizens and emperors like Marcus Aurelius consumed daily. We can see the emperor, the philosopher king, taking his daily dose of the poppy to soothe the burdens of ruling the known world. His stoicism chemically supported by the resin of the flower. Galen described the drug as a gift that resists poison and venom, cures chronic headache, vertigo, deafness, epilepsy, apoplexy, dimness of sight, loss of voice, asthma, coughs of all kinds, spitting of blood, tightness of breath, colic, the iliac poison, jaundice, hardness of the spleen, stone, urinary complaints, fevers, dropsies, leprosies, the troubles to which women are subject, melancholy and all pestilences. It was a list so exhaustive it revealed humanity's desperation. They had found a key that fit every lock of human suffering. But as the sun sets over the Parthenon, casting long shadows across the white marble, a somber realization takes hold. The Greeks had opened a door that could not be closed. They had codified the use of a substance that offered a shortcut to peace, a chemical hack for the human condition. They understood that the poppy belonged to both the brother of sleep and the brother of death, and by inviting one, they were always risking a visit from the other. The Greek dream was a lucid one, filled with the knowledge that their salvation grew from the same root as their destruction, a lesson that would lie dormant in the soil, waiting for the industrial hunger of the future to wake it up. From the rocky shores of Greece, the history of the poppy flows like a dark river, widening and deepening as it reaches the heart of the ancient world's greatest superpower. We move now into the sprawling might of the Roman Empire. If Greece was the mind that analyzed the flower, Rome was the body that consumed it. Here, the poppy's shadow grew long across the cobblestones, stretching from the sun-drenched forums of Italy to the mist-shrouded frontiers of Britannia. Rome, in its decadent grandeur, did not merely use the drug, it integrated it into the very bloodstream of the state, consuming the harvest of the East with a voracious, imperial appetite. To understand the scale of this consumption, we must look to the very pinnacle of Roman power. Picture the Danube frontier, a bleak and gray landscape where the wind howls through the encampments of the Roman legions. Inside a tent of heavy canvas, sitting before a flickering oil lamp, sits Marcus Aurelius. He is the philosopher king, the man whose meditations preach stoicism and resilience. Yet, historians and the physicians of the time whisper a different truth about his daily ritual. The emperor was a man in constant physical torment, his body failing under the colossal weight of ruling the known world. Every morning and every evening, a physician would approach the emperor with a silver spoon and a jar of a dark, viscous substance known as theriac. This was not a simple medicine. It was a masterpiece of ancient pharmacology, a fermentation of over 60 ingredients: cinnamon, agaric, gum, and sometimes even the flesh of vipers, all bound together by the heavy, golden gravity of opium. Watch as the emperor swallows the bitter treacle. He waits. Slowly, the trembling in his hands ceases, the sharp edge of his anxiety dulls, the chaos of the Germanic wars, the political intrigues of the Senate, the fear of death, it all fades into a manageable hum, pushed back by the chemical wall of the poppy. It is a profound irony that the greatest Stoic in history, the man who wrote that pain is neither unbearable nor unending, found his endurance at the bottom of a poppy cup. But the Imperial Elixir was not reserved for the Kaisers alone. The poppy was a commodity of the state, controlled, taxed, and distributed with the same bureaucratic efficiency as grain or olive oil. Walk through the mental reconstruction of a bustling Roman market at twilight. The air is filled with the smoke of roasting meat and the cacophony of 1,000 voices. Amidst the stalls selling pottery and tunics, you would find the vendors of opium thebacum. It was sold in small cakes or dissolved in wine, a staple for the soldier marching to his death and the mother mourning her lost child. The Romans had no word for addiction in the modern sense. To them, this was simply a tool for living, a way to navigate a world that was often brutal, short, and painful. The wealthy utilized it to drift through bored afternoons in their villas, The poor used it to numb the ache of an empty stomach or a broken limb. The city of Rome itself, with its 1,000,000 inhabitants, lived in a state of partial sedation, a collective haze that smoothed the sharp edges of an empire built on blood and iron. The poppy was the unseen mortar holding the societal bricks together, preventing the sheer misery of the plebeian class from boiling over into revolt. However, all things that rise must eventually fall. As the centuries ground on, the internal rot of the empire began to mirror the lethargy of the drug itself. The borders collapsed. The aqueducts ran dry. The great marble edifices cracked under the weight of time and fire. As the Roman Empire fractured and crumbled under the waves of barbarian migrations, the intricate trade routes that brought the finest opium from the east were severed. The lights of the cities went out, one by one, and Europe plunged into the long, gray twilight of the Dark Ages. This era descends like a heavy velvet curtain upon the stage of history. For nearly 1,000 years, the sophisticated medical knowledge of Galen and the daily familiarity with the poppy retreated into the shadows. The clamor of the Roman Forum was replaced by the silence of the deep forests and the muddy isolation of feudal villages. But the flower did not disappear. It merely went into hibernation. The knowledge of the poppy was preserved in the only places where the light of literacy still flickered. The cold, stone libraries of isolated monasteries. Picture a lone Benedictine monk, his breath visible in the freezing air of the scriptorium. Carefully copying the ancient texts by candlelight, he traces the Latin words for the sleep-inducing sponge, the analgesic draughts. He cultivates the poppy in the monastery's physic garden, not for the pleasure of the masses, but for the mercy of the sick and dying within the abbey walls. Outside, in the satchels of wandering healers and wise women, the poppy remained a folk secret, a remnant of a forgotten age. In this long silence, the plant waited. It persisted in the soil, patient and eternal, its genetic code holding the same power that had seduced Sumerians and emperors alike. It waited for the world to reconnect, for the trade winds to blow again, and for a new kind of hunger to awaken in the West. The flower knew, in its mindless biological certainty, that its true reign was not in the past, but yet to come. The age of faith kept the lid on the jar, but the pressure was building, and when the seal was finally broken, the poppy would unleash a flood that would change the face of the globe forever. While the stone halls of Europe lay cold and dormant, shrouded in the gray mists of the Dark Ages, the lamp of human knowledge did not go out, it merely moved. The flame was carried eastward, across the Mediterranean, to the sun-drenched courtyards of the Islamic Golden Age. Here, under the vast, starry domes of Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo, the secrets of the ancient Greeks were not only preserved but resurrected and refined with a new mathematical precision. It was in this cradle of alchemy and astronomy that the poppy found its new guardians, the Arab physicians, with their obsession for categorizing the natural world, took the raw legacy of Galen and distilled it. They gave the substance a new name, a word that rolls off the tongue like a heavy, scented smoke. Asteriskifian asterisk. To understand the journey of this resin, one must visualize the great arteries of trade that pulsed across the medieval world. The Silk Road was not a single path, but a sprawling, treacherous web of caravan routes stretching from the glittering ports of the Levant to the jade gates of China. Picture the scene under the vast, indifferent canopy of the desert night. The silence is absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic thud of camel hooves on the sand and the creaking of leather saddles. These are the caravans of the merchant princes, the navigators of the dunes. Among their cargo nestled between bolts of shimmering silk, sacks of pepper, and chests of indigo sat sealed ceramic jars filled with a dark, sticky paste. This was the Aphian asterisk, a commodity that was rapidly becoming as precious as gold itself. In the bustling, aromatic laboratories of the Middle East, the relationship with the drug was shifting. The great polymaths of the era, men like Al-Razi and the legendary Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna, studied the poppy with a scientific rigor that bordered on reverence. Avicenna, the prince of physicians, whose asterisk canon of medicine asterisk would serve as the primary medical text for both the East and Europe for centuries, praised opium as the most powerful of all stupefiants. He cataloged its uses for dysentery, for the eyes, for the unbearable pain of surgery. Yet, in the life of Avicenna, we find the tragic foreshadowing of the poppy's double-edged sword. It is whispered by historians that the great doctor, the man who codified the healing arts, fell victim to his own study, using the drug to manage the exhaustion of his boundless intellect, eventually succumbing to the very shadow he sought to master. As the caravans pressed further east, crossing the jagged spine of the Hindu Kush and descending into the lush valleys of India, the nature of the drug began to mutate. In the cooler climates of the West, it had been a medicine, a grim necessity for pain, but as it touched the opulent courts of the East, Aphian asterisk began to shed its medical skin and clothe itself in the robes of luxury. In the Mughal courts and the palaces of Persian shahs, it became a companion to leisure, a substance of profound value used to enhance the poetry of the evening or to soften the edges of a ruler's boredom. It was no longer just about silencing a scream, it was about extending a dream. The Elixir, a mix of opium, honey, and spices, became a staple of high society, a way to float above the dust and heat of the mortal world. The journey continued, relentless as the tide, pushing eventually to the boundaries of the Middle Kingdom. Arab traders, weary from months of travel, arrived at the majestic ports of Tang Dynasty China. They brought with them the black earth of the poppy. At first, the Chinese viewed this foreign substance with the detached curiosity of scholars. They called it asterisk a few young asterisk, a phonetic borrowing of the Arabic name. In these early days, it was a rarity, a tribute item fit for the emperor, used sparingly to control dysentery or to aid in the sexual longevity of the elite. There was no smoke, yet only the swallowing of the bitter gum. The dragon had not yet woken. It was merely tasting the air. Yet, the seeds of the future were being sown with every jar that crossed the mountains. The Silk Road acted as a hypodermic needle, injecting the extract of the poppy into the veins of Asia. It established a hunger that would lie dormant for centuries, a quiet predilection for the peace the flower offered. The trade routes solidified the economic value of the drug, transforming it from a botanical curiosity into a unit of currency, a stored value that could survive the collapse of dynasties. As we look back at this era of dissemination, we see the tragic beauty of it. We see the caravans moving under the starlight, beautiful and slow, unaware that they are carrying a plague in their saddlebags. They believed they were transporting a gift from God, a medicine to soothe the bowels and the mind. They could not see the future wars, the burning summer palaces, or the millions of skeletal figures that would one day haunt the streets of Shanghai and Bombay. In the golden light of the Islamic Renaissance, the poppy was innocent, scientific, and wondrous. But as the sun set on the medieval world, The long shadows of the camels stretched out toward the east, pointing the way to a future where this black gum would dictate the fate of nations, becoming a king more powerful and more terrible than any human monarch. The wind shifts once more, blowing from the minarets of the east back to the cobblestones of the west. The long, gray winter of the Dark Ages begins to recede, burned away by the rising sun of the Renaissance. It is the 16th century, and Europe is awakening not just to art and philosophy, but to a new, voracious hunger for the secrets of the natural world. In this era of rediscovery, where men dared to dissect the human body and map the stars, we encounter a figure who walks the knife edge between genius and madness. He is a wanderer, a brawler, a man who burned the books of the ancients in the public square. His name was Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, but history remembers him simply and thunderously as Paracelsus. Imagine him tramping through the mud of the Swiss Alps, his cloak tattered, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He is not a scholar of the ivory tower. He is a physician of the road, learning from executioners, barbers, and midwives. At his side, swinging with the rhythm of his heavy stride, hangs a great longsword. Legend whispers that he never removed it, even while he slept. The people believed he kept a demon trapped in the pommel of this weapon, a familiar that whispered secrets of the future. But the truth was far more physical, and perhaps far more dangerous. Inside the hollow handle of his sword, Paracelsus carried a small stash of dark, resinous pills. He called them his stones of immortality, his lapis philosophorum asterisk. To the uninitiated, they were magic. To the botanist, they were merely refined opium. Paracelsus was a revolutionary because he rejected the complex, shotgun medicines of the past, the theriacs with their 60 ingredients that muddled the body. He sought the quintessence, the pure soul of the medicine, and in his alchemical laboratories, amidst the hiss of retorts and the smell of sulfur, he made a discovery that would alter the trajectory of human pain. He found that the active alkaloids of the poppy were not easily dissolved in water, but they surrendered their secrets willingly to alcohol. He took the black gum of the ancients and married it to the spirits of wine. The result was a tincture, a clear, reddish-brown liquid that held the power of the poppy in a suspended, potent state. He named this creation with a flourish of Latin arrogance. Laudanum asterisk. The word stems from laudare asterisk, meaning to praise, for he believed the relief it brought was worthy of divine worship. I possess a secret remedy which I call laudanum. He boasted to the medical faculties that despised him, and which is superior to all other heroic remedies. He was right. The liquid was fast-acting, shelf-stable, and infinitely easier to dose than the raw chunks of gum sold in the bazaars. By dissolving the opium, he had unlocked its full potential, creating a delivery system that could enter the bloodstream with the warmth of brandy and the silence of the grave. This bottle, this small vial of amber liquid, became the Trojan horse of the West. Slowly, steadily, it moved from the alchemist's shelf to the apothecary's counter, and finally, to the bedside table of the common home. For the next 400 years, laudanum would become the aspirin of Europe and America. But infinitely more seductive, it was the universal answer to the human condition. It was there for the colicky infant in the nursery, silencing their cries with a few sweet drops. It was there for the soldier returning from the wars with a shattered leg. It was there for the consumptive poet coughing blood into a handkerchief, and for the Queen of England herself, soothing the aches of age. It masked the pain of the Black Death, the throb of gout, the twisting cramps of cholera, and the crushing sorrow of grief. It was a liquid miracle that cost pennies and offered a respite that kings would have traded their crowns for. But in this democratization of relief, a shadow began to form. Paracelsus had unwittingly created a trap. The stones of immortality did not grant eternal life, but they did create a kind of living purgatory for those who lingered too long in their embrace. Because laudanum was alcohol-based, it was socially acceptable, slipping under the radar of moral scrutiny. It created a silent legion of the dependent housewives, factory workers, and aristocrats who found that without their daily draft, the world became a jagged, unbearable place. They were the first modern addicts, though the word did not yet exist to describe them. They lived in a honeymoon phase with the drug, a period where the medicine seemed only to heal, before the inevitable tolerance set in, demanding more and more of the reddish-brown water to achieve the same silence. As we watch the sun set on the Renaissance, we see the legacy of Paracelsus crystallize. He had sought to liberate medicine from the Dark Ages, and in doing so, he had unbottled a genie that could never be put back. The opium was no longer a raw product of the earth. It was now a product of science, refined, bottled, and branded. The relationship between man and flower had shifted from a ritual of the field to a habit of the home. The bottle was open, the cork was thrown away, and the liquid shadow began to pour into the very foundations of Western civilization, preparing the world for the industrial scale of intoxication that was yet to come. The wind that carries the seeds of fate now shifts its course, abandoning the stone streets of Europe for the vast, endless horizons of the East. We drift across the steppes, over the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, until we descend into the Middle Kingdom. Here, in the walled empire of China, time flows like a sluggish river, deep and treacherous, for 1,000 years. The relationship between the Chinese people and the poppy had been one of respectful distance. It was known as *ying su*, a medicinal herb, a literal binding agent used by physicians to check the flow of dysentery or to ease the cough of a dying elder. It was swallowed, digested, and metabolized slowly by the body. But in the 17th century, the wind brought a change not from the soil, but from the sea. To understand the tragedy that was about to unfold, we must look to the coast, where the great Spanish galleons, heavy with silver and strange goods, docked at the ports of Fujian. They brought with them a habit from the newly discovered Americas: the smoking of tobacco. This dry alcohol, as it was called, swept through the Ming dynasty with the speed of a wildfire. It captivated the elite and the peasant alike, but history is written in ironies. The last emperor of the Ming dynasty, the Chongzhen emperor, fearing that the cultivation of tobacco was consuming land meant for grain, issued a decree. He banned the smoking of the leaf. It was a decision made with the logic of a ruler, but it triggered the law of unintended consequences. Deprived of their smoke, the people sought a replacement. They found that by mixing a small amount of opium with the tobacco, a blend known as *Madak*, the harshness of the leaf was smooth, and a profound, dreamy stillness took hold. Slowly, the tobacco was removed from the equation entirely, leaving only the pure, refined paste of the poppy. And thus, a fundamental shift occurred in human biology. the ingestion turned to inhalation. When opium is eaten, it must pass through the fortress of the stomach and the liver, a slow march that dilutes its power. But when it is smoked, the alkaloids ride the vapor directly into the lungs, crossing the blood-brain barrier in seconds. It was no longer a medicine. It was a thunderclap to the nervous system. This chemical revelation birthed a new object, a tool that would become the symbol of China's sorrow, the opium pipe. Imagine this object, not as a piece of paraphernalia, but as a darkly beautiful instrument of doom. It was often crafted from bamboo, ivory, or silver, long and slender like a flute. At one end was the saddle, a heavy damper made of clay or jade, with a tiny, pinprick hole in the center. The ritual of the pipe was not a hasty act. It was a ceremony of patience requiring a quiet room and a complete surrender of the will. Visualize the scene in a dimly lit room in the late Ming era. The smoker does not sit. He lies down on a wooden bench or a mat, for the gravity of the drug will soon make standing impossible. Beside him burns a small oil lamp, its flame shielded by a glass bell, steady and unblinking. The smoker, or an attendant, takes a long metal needle and dips it into a jar of black, treacle-like opium paste. He twirls the needle over the flame, roasting the droplet until it bubbles and expands, cooking it to the perfect consistency of a soft, golden bead. With the precision of a jeweler, the smoker inserts this roasted bead into the tiny eye of the pipe bowl. He does not touch the flame with the opium. That would burn it and destroy the magic. Instead, he holds the bowl over the heat, drawing air through the stem. The heat vaporizes the resin, and the white smoke, sweet, thick, and heavy with the scent of fermented cream and almonds, travels down the bamboo, cooling as it moves, until it fills the lungs. The effect is immediate. The world, with all its sharp edges, its demands, its noises, and its sorrows, simply ceases to exist. There is no chaotic euphoria, no drunken stumbling. There is only a crystallization of time. The smoker feels a sensation of floating, a detachment from the flesh. Hunger vanishes. Lust vanishes. Ambition, that driving force of empires, dissolves into a warm, gray mist. The Chinese called it chasing the dragon, a poetic euphemism for a pursuit that could never be caught. For the dragon always flew a little higher with each pipe, demanding more of the smoker's soul to reach it. In the beginning, this was the vice of the literati, the scholars and the wealthy merchants who sought to enhance their appreciation of art or to escape the boredom of a gilded cage. They would gather in courtyards, surrounded by silkscreens and orchids, drifting away on clouds of white vapor. But smoke, by its very nature, cannot be contained. It seeped under the doors of the palaces and into the barracks of the soldiers. It drifted into the cramped quarters of the coolies and the laborers. It became the solace of the rickshaw driver, who used it to numb the ache of his legs, and the escape of the concubine, who used it to forget the walls of her prison. As the Ming dynasty crumbled and the Qing dynasty rose, the pipe became a ubiquitous shadow across the land. It was a slow-moving fog that began to paralyze the energy of a civilization. A man who lives in the dream of the pipe does not tend his fields with vigor. A soldier whose blood is thick with smoke does not sharpen his sword. The productivity of the nation began to sag. The silver that flowed into China for tea and silk began to flow out, spent on the black mud of the poppy. The dragon, the ancient symbol of imperial power and vitality, had breathed in the smoke, and now, heavy-lidded and lethargic, it struggled to exhale. The stage was set for a collision of worlds. For the drug had hollowed out the empire from within, leaving it brittle and fragile, waiting for the first blow from the iron fist of the West. The salt spray of the Atlantic stings our eyes as we leave the ancient landmasses behind and venture onto the open, heaving canvas of the high seas. The 18th century does not march to the rhythm of armies or the chanting of monks, but to the creaking of timber and the snapping of canvas sails. We have entered the age of the merchant empires, where the map of the world was being redrawn not by conquerors, but by accountants. Looming over this era like a leviathan of the deep is the British East India Company. It was a corporation with the power of a nation-state, a peculiar entity that possessed its own armies, its own currency, and the ability to dictate the fate of millions from a boardroom in London. But despite its sprawling might, this honorable company faced a dire existential crisis, a hemorrhage that threatened to sink the British treasury. The problem was born of a gentle addiction. Across the grey, rain-swept expanse of Great Britain, a new habit had taken hold. From the drawing rooms of the aristocracy to the cottages of the working class, the British had developed an insatiable thirst for a bitter, amber liquid, tea. The leaves could only be sourced from the distant, mysterious valleys of China. Along with this tea, the West craved the delicate blue and white porcelain to serve it in and the shimmering silks to wear while drinking it. But the Celestial Empire, ruled by the Qing dynasty, looked upon the West with a haughty indifference. When the British offered their heavy woolens, their scientific instruments, and their manufactured trinkets in trade, the Chinese emperor replied with a chilling simplicity. Our Celestial Empire possesses all things in prolific abundance. We have no need of your manufactures. China demanded only one thing in return for their leaves: silver. The heavy, gleaming Spanish dollars, minted in the Americas, were the only currency the Chinese merchants would accept. And so, a great river of silver began to flow out of Britain and into the coffers of China. The British economy began to stagger. The trade imbalance was catastrophic. The directors of the company, sitting in their leather chairs in Leadenhall Street, realized they needed a commodity that the Chinese could not refuse. They needed something that would create its own demand, something that would hook the buyer so deeply that the flow of silver would reverse. They needed a key to unlock the closed door of the East. They found their answer not in a factory of iron, but in the fertile, sun-baked mud of Bengal, India. Here, under the blinding white sky of the subcontinent, the company industrialized the production of the poppy with a frightening, bureaucratic efficiency. The casual, garden-based cultivation of the past was swept away, replaced by a vast, monocultural machine. Picture the fields of Patna and Benares, stretching to the horizon, a sea of white and purple flowers waving in the hot wind. The harvest was no longer a ritual. It was a production line. Thousands of Indian laborers moved through the fields, lancing the pods, scraping the gum, and collecting the black mud in earthen pots. This raw opium was transported to massive processing factories, structures that resembled the armories of war. Inside, in the stifling heat, workers waded through vats of the viscous black paste, mixing it to a standardized consistency. They trampled it, kneaded it, and rolled it into balls the size of cannonballs, each stamped with the seal of the company. These were the Patna and Benares brands, the first globally recognized narcotics. The balls were wrapped in a shell of poppy petals and dried on wooden racks that lined the walls like the library of a dark wizard. It was a scene of industrial alchemy, turning the sweat of the Indian peasant into the gold of the British merchant. But there was a complication. The Emperor of China had strictly forbidden the importation of opium. It was illegal, a capital offense. The Honorable Company, however, found a way to maintain the veneer of legality while fueling the crime. They held public auctions in Calcutta, selling the chests of opium to private traders, men who operated the fast, sharp-prowed ships known as country-wallas and, later, the sleek opium clippers. These vessels were the ghosts of the horizon, built for speed, designed to outrun the winds and the coastal patrols. The system was a masterpiece of willful blindness. The company could claim they were merely selling a product in India, washing their hands of what happened once the ships left the harbor. But they knew exactly where the chests were going. The ships cut through the Straits of Malacca, racing toward the Pearl River Delta. There, in the floating lawless city of Linton Island, the cargo was offloaded into scramble crabs fast, multi-oared Chinese smuggling boats that darted into the jagged coastline under the cover of night. The transaction was complete. The chests of foreign mud entered China, and the silver flowed out, returning to the pockets of the British gentlemen who sipped their tea in London, willfully ignoring the fact that their elegant afternoon ritual was paid for by the misery of millions on the other side of the world. It was a triangle of trade built on smoke and blood. The opium pipe began to rot the teeth and the soul of the celestial empire, draining its treasury and paralyzing its people. The British had found their commodity, their silver killer. The poppy had been weaponized, transformed from a flower of sleep into a battering ram of commerce. And the collision between the immovable object of China and the irresistible force of British greed was about to set the world on fire. The shadows lengthened over the Pearl River, and the air grew heavy with the coming storm. The wheel of history turns slowly, grinding down the years until we arrive at the precipice of 1839. We find ourselves standing on the humid banks of the Pearl River, where the air is thick with the scent of humidity, spice, and impending doom. The crisis in the Middle Kingdom has reached a boiling point, a fever pitch that can no longer be cooled by the slow bureaucracy of the past. The Qing dynasty, the great pure empire, is witnessing its own bloodletting. The Dogwang Emperor, sitting upon the dragon throne in Beijing, looks out across his vast dominion and sees a civilization withering. The silver of the treasury is draining away into the pockets of foreign ghosts, and the people, his children, are turning into skeletal shadows, lost in the sweet, paralyzing fog of the pipe. To save the body of the empire, he must cut out the cancer, and so he summons a man of iron integrity, a figure who will stand as the last great moral wall against the rising tide of the West. Commissioner Lin Zexu. Lin Zexu is a figure of tragic nobility, carved from the granite of Confucian virtue. He is a scholar official of the old school, a man who believes deeply in the rule of law, the sanctity of the family, and the mandate of heaven. He arrives in Canton, the only port open to the foreign devils, with a mission that is as clear as it is impossible: to eradicate the opium trade once and for all. He does not see this as a mere economic dispute. He sees it as a battle for the human soul. Before the violence begins, Lin attempts an act of profound diplomatic faith. He picks up his brush, dips it in black ink, and composes a letter to the ruler of the distant island nation responsible for this plague. Queen Victoria. It is a document of heartbreaking logic and moral clarity. Lynn writes not as a conqueror, but as a concerned elder addressing a wayward peer. He asks a simple, piercing question that echoes through the corridors of history. By what right do they British merchants use the poisonous drug to injure the Chinese people? He appeals to her conscience, arguing that since opium is banned in Britain, she must know it is evil. He assumes that she is unaware of the crimes committed in her name. Let us ask, where is your conscience? He writes, I have heard that the smoking of opium is very strictly forbidden by your country. Since it is not permitted to do harm to your own country, then even less should you let it be passed on to the harm of other countries. The letter is sealed and sent, a paper boat cast into a stormy ocean. It is lost in transit, or perhaps simply ignored, buried in the bureaucratic machinery of the Foreign Office. It never reaches the Queen's eyes. The silence that returns from the West is the only answer Lynn needs. The time for words has passed. Now, the time for action descends like a hammer. Lynn acts with a decisiveness that stuns the foreign community. He surrounds the 13 factories, the riverside enclave where the European traders live and work. He cuts off their food. He removes their servants. He holds the most powerful merchants of the British Empire hostage in their own gilded warehouses. It is a siege of sheer will. For weeks, the tension mounts, the humidity rising along with the panic. Until finally, the British Superintendent of Trade, Captain Charles Elliot, capitulates. The order is given. The warehouses are thrown open. The foreign mud is surrendered. Over 20,000 chests of opium are hauled out into the light. It is a mountain of addiction. Over 2.5 million pounds of the dark reason, enough to keep the entire empire asleep for a year. But Lynn does not merely want to confiscate it. He wants to cleanse the world of it. He orders the chests to be taken to the beach at Humen, a place where the river meets the sea. Here, under the watchful eyes of the public and the invited foreign observers, the great destruction begins. This is not a simple bonfire. Lin Zexu knows that burning the opium would only release the vapor into the air, drugging the workers and the onlookers. Instead, he orchestrates a massive chemical dissolution, a scientific ritual of purification. Picture the scene on the beach. Great trenches are dug into the sand, lined with timber and stone to create vast holding tanks. The workers, stripped to the waist, break open the wooden chests and smash the spherical balls of opium into pieces. The dark crumbs are thrown into the trenches, which have been filled with water. Then comes the catalyst. Lin orders the addition of rock lime and salt. As the white lime hits the water, a violent chemical reaction occurs. The water begins to boil and hiss, the heat rising as the lime attacks the alkaloids of the poppy. The mixture churns, turning into a full, bubbling sludge. The air is filled with a stench that is both acrid and sweet, the smell of millions of dreams dying in the heat. Laborers stand on wooden bridges built over the trenches, using long poles to stir the mixture, ensuring that every grain of the drug is dissolved, that no piece of the black earth remains to tempt a scavenger. It is a moment of supreme defiance. Lin stands on the shore, watching the destruction with a stoic satisfaction. He believes he has won. He believes that by destroying the poison, he has cut the head off the snake. In a gesture that reveals the depth of his character, he even offers a prayer to the sea spirit. He apologizes for polluting the great waters with this filth, asking the creatures of the deep to swim away until the tide has washed the poison out into the vast oblivion of the ocean. when the sluice gates are finally opened. The brown, toxic river flows out into the sea, vanishing into the waves. To Lin, and to the Chinese people watching from the dunes, this is the end of the nightmare. It is a victory of morality over greed, of civilization over barbarism, but history is a cruel dramatist. Lin does not know that this act of righteousness is not an ending, but a beginning. He does not know that the destruction of property, even illegal, poisonous property, is the one sin the British Empire will not forgive. He cannot see the future that is rushing toward him, carried on the wind. He cannot see the modern warships gathering on the horizon, their steam engines stoked, their cannons primed. The destruction at Humen was a ceremonial cleansing. Yes, but it was also the spark that would ignite the war of shame. The opium was gone, dissolved in the salt and the lime, but the hunger for it remained. And the empire that pushed it was about to demand a price in blood that would stain the Pearl River red for a century to come. The sea does not remember the prayers of the righteous. It remembers only the displacement of water by the hulls of the strong. Following the destruction of the opium at Humen, a silence fell over the Pearl River, but it was the heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a thunderclap. The news of Commissioner Lin's defiance traveled slowly, carried by the trade winds back to the clouded skies of London. There, in the halls of Westminster, the destruction of the foreign mud was not seen as a moral victory for China, but as an intolerable insult to the crown and, more importantly, a violation of the sacred tenets of free trade. The machinery of the British Empire, oiled by the profits of the narcotic, began to turn with a cold, metallic precision. In 1840, the horizon of the South China Sea darkened not with storm clouds, but with the smoke of a new age. The empire of the machine had arrived to confront the empire of tradition. Leading this punitive expedition was a vessel that looked like nothing the ancient world had ever seen. Her name was the Nemesis *. She was a creature of the Industrial Revolution, a harbinger of the future forged in the shipyards of Birkenhead. Unlike the majestic wooden frigates of the past, she was built of iron. She did not rely on the fickleness of the wind. She was powered by a steam engine that turned massive paddle wheels, churning the water into a white froth. To the Chinese observers watching from the shore, she appeared to be a demon, a low-slung black reptile that breathed fire and smoke, moving against the tide and the wind with an unnatural, terrifying will. She was the devil ship, and she carried within her iron belly the death knell of the king naval dominance. The collision, when it came, was not a battle. It was a collision of eras. Picture the scene at the Battle of Chuenpi or the engagements along the Canton River. The Chinese fleet sailed out to meet the invaders, an armada of war junks painted with the eyes of dragons to ward off evil spirits. These vessels were beautiful, masterpieces of a bygone age, built of teak and bamboo, powered by stiff rectangular sails, and armed with brass cannons that had not changed significantly in centuries. They floated in the harbor like antique toys, bobbing on the waves, their crews beating gongs and waving banners to intimidate the enemy. They were fighting a war of symbols and morale. The British were fighting a war of physics. As the Nemesis engaged, the disparity became a scene of horrific clarity. The British guns, rifled and precise, ranged farther and hit harder than anything the defenders possessed. The Congreve rockets, screaming like banshees, arched through the sky, trailing fire before tearing through the canvas sails and wooden decks of the junks. wood shattered under the impact of explosive shells. The asterisk Nemesis asterisk, with her shallow draft, ignored the mudflats that protected the Chinese forts, steaming effortlessly into the shallows to deliver point-blank broadsides. It was a slaughter of the old world by the new. The Chinese sailors fought with desperate courage, standing amidst the splinters and the smoke. But courage is no shield against shrapnel. One by one, the junks burned and sank, their dragon eyes slipping beneath the murky water, taking the illusion of China's isolation and superiority down with them. The war moved up the coast, a slow, inexorable procession of destruction. The British fleet did not just attack the military. They attacked the economic arteries of the empire. They steamed up the Yangtze River, the lifeblood of China, reaching the intersection with the Grand Canal. By blockading this point, they strangled the flow of grain to Beijing. The asterisk Nemesis asterisk and her sisters drifted past the green paddy fields and the pagodas, a jarring visual intrusion of black iron against the verdant landscape. The psychological shock to the Qing officials was absolute. They were watching the laws of their universe crumble. How could a ship move without sails? How could a barbarian tribe from a tiny island humiliate the Middle Kingdom? The answer lay in the smokestacks and the rifled barrels. The Industrial Revolution had weaponized the narcotic trade, and the mandate of heaven was being revoked by the mandate of steam. The end came in the sweltering heat of August 1842. The British fleet dropped anchor outside the city of Nanking, their guns trained on the ancient walls. The emperor, realizing that further resistance would lead to the annihilation of his rule, sued for peace. The signing of the treaty took place aboard the Ms. Cornwallis asterisk. Picture the scene on the gun deck. The British officers in their gold-braided uniforms, sweating but triumphant, the Qing officials in their silk robes, bowed by the invisible weight of history. The air was thick with humidity and shame. The Treaty of Nanking was signed, the first of the unequal treaties. The terms were a carving knife taken to the body of the empire. China was forced to pay a massive indemnity for the war and, cruelly, for the opium that Lin Zexu had destroyed. 5 ports, including Shanghai and Canton, were forced open to foreign trade, ending centuries of controlled access, and, in a clause that would echo into the modern geopolitical nightmare, the island of Hong Kong, then a barren rock with hardly a house upon it, was ceded to the British Crown in perpetuity. As the ink dried on the parchment, the walls of China were breached. They were not brought down by an army of millions, nor by the trebuchets of the Mongols, but by a flower and the gunboats that protected it. The opium, which Lin had tried so valiantly to wash into the sea, now poured back in, unchecked and legalized. The chests of black mud stacked up on the wharves of Shanghai, a dark tide rising to engulf the population. The century of humiliation had begun. Born from the poppy's crimson flower and the iron hull of the asterisk Nemesis asterisk, the lesson engraved upon the Chinese psyche was brutal and enduring. In the modern world, moral superiority meant nothing against superior firepower and the ruthless, cold mathematics of addiction. The dragon lay wounded, breathing shallowly, while the smoke of the pipe and the smoke of the steamer drifted together, weaving a shroud over the celestial empire. The smoke from the burning junks of the Pearl River fades into the distance. But the narrative of the poppy does not end with the humiliation of China. It merely changes its state of matter. We drift now, halfway across the globe, away from the humid heat of the east and into the chill, damp embrace of the north. We arrive in the labyrinthine heart of the British Empire. the sprawling, soot-stained metropolis of London. It is the 19th century, and while the foreign mud was a weapon of war abroad, here, on the cobbled streets of the capital, it was a domestic comfort, a household god, and a muse of terrible beauty. A different kind of fog has settled over the city, one composed not of river mist and coal dust, but of the heavy, sweet vapor of laudanum. To understand this era, we must step out of the harsh sunlight of history and into the flickering gaslight of the romantic imagination. The Victorian age is often remembered for its stiff collars and rigid morality. But beneath this veneer lay a society floating in a collective, chemically induced dissociation. Opium was legal, cheap, and ubiquitous. It was sold not by shady dealers in back alleys, but by reputable chemists and grocers, stacked alongside tea and sugar. It was the aspirin of the age. But it was also something far more profound for a specific group of men, the dreamers, the poets, the visionaries. The bottle of reddish-brown tincture was a key to a locked door in the human mind. Enter the candlelit study of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The rain lashes against the windowpane, blurring the lights of the city outside. The poet sits in an armchair, his body racked with the dull ache of rheumatism and the sharp stab of neuralgia. He reaches for the decanter, he pours the laudanum, the spirits of wine infused with the tears of the poppy. As he drinks, the pain recedes, replaced by a warmth that spreads from the stomach to the limbs. And finally, to the soul, the walls of the room dissolve. The gray reality of England melts away, replaced by the vivid, hallucinatory landscapes of *Xanadu*. He sees the stately pleasure dome, the Alph, the sacred river, and the caves of measureless to man. He picks up his quill, scratching furiously against the parchment, trying to capture the architecture of his dream before the effects fade. To the Romantics, opium was the milk of paradise. It was a technological tool for the spirit, a way to bypass the limitations of the senses and touch the sublime. But as Coleridge found, the muse was a jealous mistress. The poem *Cobla Can* remains a fragment, broken off when the person from Porlock knocked on the door, shattering the trance and leaving the poet stranded on the shores of reality, forever longing for the return of the dream. But if Coleridge was the dreamer, Thomas de Quincey was the cartographer of this dark continent. In his seminal work, *Confessions of an English Opium Eater*, he stripped away the medical pretense and laid bare the psychological landscape of addiction. He described the experience with a haunting, Gothic beauty that seduced a generation. Thou buildest upon the bosom of darkness, out of the fantastic imagery of the brain, cities and temples. He wrote, addressing the drug directly. De Quincey wandered the streets of London like a ghost. His mind expanded to encompass uns of time and space. He spoke of the pleasures of opium, the clarity, the music of the opera sounding like the voice of God, but he also chronicled the pains. He described the Iliad of woes that followed the euphoria, the nightmares of crocodiles and endless staircases, the paralysis of the will, the feeling of being buried alive. He showed the world that the poppy was a coin with two faces, and while one side bore the image of a god, the other bore the grin of a demon. Yet, the romance of the poets was a velvet shroud draped over a rotting reality. We must descend now, down from the high garrets of the artists, down through the strata of society, to the mud and the grime of the East End. The poppy is a democrat. It treats the genius and the wretch with the same chemical indifference. Below the literary elite, the working class of Victorian England used opium not to find a muse, but to survive the crushing weight of the Industrial Revolution. In the rookeries and the slums, where entire families lived in a single, damp room, opium was the only escape from the cold, the hunger, and the relentless noise of the satanic mills. Walk through a Sunday market in the slums. You see the haggard faces of factory workers, their lungs coated in cotton dust, lining up to buy their pennyworth of peace. They did not buy pure opium. They bought it in the form of patent medicines with comforting names like Godfrey's Cordial or Mother's Quietness. These were treacles, thick, sweet syrups laced with laudanum. And here, the story takes its darkest turn. The primary consumers of these cordials were not the workers themselves, but their children. In an age where women were forced to work 14-hour days in the factories to keep the family from starvation, there was no maternity leave, no daycare. The infants were left with baby farmers or elderly relatives, or sometimes left alone in the crib to keep them from crying, to keep them from feeling the gnawing ache of an empty stomach. They were dosed with cordial. It was a practice that echoes with a chilling practicality. The quietness of the Victorian nursery was often a chemical coma. The doctors of the time noted with horror the shrunken, old man faces of the infants, their skin hanging loose, their eyes glassy and pinned. They were fading away, starving to death while in a state of narcotic suspension. The literary genius writing of ancestral voices prophesying war and the dying child in the Manchester slum were bound together by the same vine, connected by the invisible thread of the poppy sladex. It was a society of extreme duality, where the height of artistic expression and the depth of human misery were fueled by the exact same substance. The fog of London was not just weather. It was a state of mind. The British Empire, at the zenith of its power, was floating on a cloud of laudanum, creating art and misery in equal measure, drifting slowly toward the 20th century, where the milk of paradise would curdle into the hard, synthetic needles of the modern age. The story of the poppy has, until now, been a story of the earth. It has been a narrative of soil and sunlight, of farmers and emperors, of sticky gums and resinous tears harvested by hand under the open sky. But as the 19th century dawned, the wind shifted, the narrative moved from the chaotic, organic sprawling of the field into the cold, controlled silence of the laboratory. Science, in its relentless and often arrogant pursuit of purity, began to sharpen its knife. It sought to strip the poppy of its mystery, to discard the plant matter, the waxes, and the vegetable debris, and to hold in its hand the singular, vibrating soul of the flower. We must travel to the sleepy town of Paderborn, Germany, in the year 1804. Here, in the back room of a dusty apothecary, a young apprentice named Friedrich Serturner is working late into the night. He is only 20 years old, a man possessed by a singular curiosity. While the rest of Europe is distracted by the marching armies of Napoleon, Serturner is fighting a war against nature itself. He believes that the power of opium is not diffuse, but concentrated, hidden within the gum like a diamond inside a lump of coal. Picture the scene: the flickering candlelight illuminating rows of glass beakers, the smell of ammonia and acid hanging heavy in the air. Serturner takes the crude opium and dissolves it in acid, then neutralizes it with ammonia. He watches, breathless, as a reaction occurs. From the dark, muddy liquid, something miraculous begins to precipitate. White, translucent crystals form at the bottom of the flask. They are pure, geometric, and silent. He has done what no alchemist before him could achieve. He has isolated the active alkaloid of a medicinal plant. He has captured the ghost in the machine. Sir Torner, knowing the terrifying power of what he has found, names the substance with a poetic gravity that belies his youth. He calls it Morphium after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, the son of sleep who could take any human form and walk through the walls of the waking world. But to understand the true weight of this discovery, one must understand the potency. This was not merely refined opium. This was the essence of the drug amplified tenfold. To prove his discovery, Sir Torner engaged in a terrifying ritual of self-experimentation. He and 3 young friends swallowed the crystals. What followed was a descent into a coma so deep it bordered on death, a sleep that lasted for days, filled with hallucinations of terrifying clarity. When they awoke, groggy and sick, they knew the truth. They had touched the hem of the god's robe and survived. This was the birth of modern pharmacology. The alchemist's knife had successfully severed the spirit from the body of the plant. Morphine was a miracle for the agony of surgery, a godsend for the shattered bones of the battlefield. But it was also a devil for the soul, a concentrated purity that the human brain was never designed to encounter. But the story of isolation does not end with the crystal. It requires a delivery system. For decades, morphine was swallowed, fighting its way through the fortress of the stomach and the liver, which diluted its power. Enter the mid-19th century and the invention of the hypodermic needle. It was a simple device, a glass barrel and a hollow steel fang, but it fundamentally altered the relationship between humanity and intoxication. The needle allowed the drug to bypass the body's natural defenses entirely. It breached the sanctity of the skin, delivering the tears of Morpheus directly into the rushing current of the bloodstream. The distance between the user and the oblivion was shortened from an hour to a heartbeat. It was hailed as a medical triumph. Doctors believed that by injecting the drug, they would avoid the hunger of the stomach, thereby preventing addiction. They were catastrophically wrong. During the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War, the needle became the constant companion of the surgeon. It silenced the screams of the amputee and smoothed the brow of the dying. But when the smoke cleared and the soldiers returned home, they carried a new burden. It was whispered about as the soldier's disease or the army disease. Men who had survived the cannon fire were now slaves to the glass syringe. Tethered to the relief it provided, the needle had stitched the drug into the very fabric of their nervous systems. As the century drew to a close, the scientific community, horrified by the legions of morphine addicts they had unwittingly created, sought a cure. They turned back to the laboratory, believing that chemistry could solve the problems caused by chemistry. In the late 1890s, at the pharmaceutical giant Bayer in Germany, chemists began to tinker with the morphine molecule. They boiled it with acetic anhydride, adding 2 small acetyl groups to the structure. The result was a new substance, a white powder that was even more lipid-soluble than morphine. This meant it could cross the blood-brain barrier with the speed of a lightning strike. When the workers at Bayer tested it, they reported a feeling of immense power, a surge of heroic energy. And so, with a marketing team's flourish, they named it Heroin. It is one of history's darkest ironies that heroin was marketed in 1898 as a non-addictive substitute for morphine. It was sold in pharmacies as a cough suppressant for children, a safe remedy for the common cold. The bottle featured a lion, symbolizing strength, It was the final, tragic twist of the alchemist's knife. By trying to refine the gift of nature, by trying to outsmart the biological locks of the human body, humanity had created a trap of inescapable geometric precision. The poppy fields were now far away, forgotten dreams of an agricultural past. The flower was gone. There was no sun, no soil, no harvester's hand in this new equation. There was only the white powder, cold, industrial, and merciless. The joy plant of the Sumerians had been distilled into a chemical weapon, and the god of dreams had been transformed into a white ghost that would haunt the 20th century with a hunger that could never be sated. The isolation was complete, and in the silence of the syringe, the sorrow of the world found its most perfect and most deadly vessel. The journey through the mists of time brings us, finally, to the precipice of the present moment. We stand once more at the edge of the field, the soil beneath our boots no longer the mud of ancient Sumer, but the collective dust of the millennia that have passed. We have walked the length of history, watching as the smoke of the poppy curled around the pillars of civilization. We have seen the ziggurats of Babylon crumble into sand. We have watched the marble of Rome bleach and crack under the sun. We have seen the dragon throne of the Qing dynasty topple, and the sun finally set on the British Empire. All these great edifices, these monuments to human hubris and power, have turned to dust and memory, but the flower remains. It is a humbling realization that biology is more durable than stone. The asterisk papaver somniferum asterisk has outlasted every king who sought to tax it, every emperor who sought to ban it, and every scientist who sought to tame it. It blooms today with the same defiant vibrance it possessed in the Neolithic age. Shift your gaze to the rugged, ochre mountains of Afghanistan, specifically the Helmand province. Here, in a landscape scarred by decades of modern warfare, where the earth is churned by the treads of tanks and the boots of foreign armies, the poppy thrives. It is the only economy that functions in the chaos. A sea of white and pink swaying against the backdrop of drone strikes and poverty. It is the golden crescent, where the farmer, much like his Sumerian ancestor, scores the bulb not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to feed his family. The cycle of survival is bound to the cycle of the harvest. Drift eastward to the humid, mist-shrouded jungles of the Golden Triangle, where the borders of Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar bleed together in a verdant embrace. Here, the poppy grows in the hidden valleys, protected by the density of the forest and the barrel of the gun. It is a crop of the margins, flourishing in the lawless spaces where the writ of the state does not run. The petals are as fragile as ever, fluttering in the breeze, utterly indifferent to the geopolitics that swirl around them. They do not know they are illegal. They only know the warmth of the sun and the thirst of the soil. But the field has also expanded beyond the physical earth. It has migrated into the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the modern world. The modern echo of the poppy is found in the orange plastic bottle on the bathroom counter, in the blister pack of pills that promise to erase the agony of a back injury or the trauma of a surgery. We live in the age of the synthetic poppy oxycodone, fentanyl, hydrocodone. These are the laboratory-born children of the asterisk hull Jill asterisk, molecularly tweaked but spiritually identical to the gum harvested 5,000 years ago. The setting has changed from the temple to the clinic, from the opium den to the suburban living room, but the mechanic remains unbroken. We are still the Neolithic farmer, or the wary Roman soldier, or the Victorian factory worker, reaching out for anything to quiet the noise of existence. The story of opium is, in the end, not a story about botany. It is the unauthorized biography of the human soul. It is a mirror reflecting our desperate, timeless need to escape the suffering of being alive. To be human is to be conscious of pain, to be aware of the passing of time, to feel the sharp edges of loss and the dull ache of loneliness. The poppy offers a solution to this fundamental condition. It creates a chemical sanctuary, a place where the jagged edges of reality are smoothed down into a soft, manageable hum. It fits the lock of our neurology with a terrifying precision, as if we were designed to receive it, or perhaps as if it were designed to capture us. From the clay tablets of Babylon to the headlines of the modern opioid crisis, the tragedy is circular. We believe, in every generation, that we can master the flower. We invent new names, new delivery systems, new regulations. We tell ourselves that this time, it will be medicine, not poison. But the poppy does not negotiate. It does not judge. It only offers. It offers a silence that is indistinguishable from death. A peace that comes with a terrible price: the slow erosion of the will, the theft of the future, and the hollowing out of the self, as the sun begins to set over this eternal field, casting long, melancholic shadows across the landscape. The crimson flowers seem to glow with an inner fire. They turn into pools of shadow, dark and inviting. The wind picks up, rustling the dry stalks, a sound that whispers of all the dreams that have been dreamt and all the lives that have been lost in this long embrace. We realize then, with a heavy heart, that the war on drugs, the treaties, the burnings, and the moralizing were all in vain. Empires rise and fall, boundaries serve only to be redrawn, and ideologies fade into obsolescence. But the poppy is the only true victor. It sways gently, eternally, in the wind, waiting for the next hand to reach out, knowing that as long as there is pain in the human heart, there will be a harvest in the fields of sleep.